In 2019, a genetics lab in Shanghai ran a test that nobody expected to matter. 11,670 DNA samples, every province in China. They compared those samples against every major ancient civilization on record: Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, the Maya, ancient Anatolia, Bronze Age Europe, every single one. The results came back. None of them matched. Not Egypt, not Mesopotamia, not one of the civilizations the world has spent centuries studying, glorifying, arguing over. Zero connection. Genetic distance so vast it was almost shocking. But then one match appeared, from a place most people have never heard of. And when that number came up on the screen, one researcher apparently went very quiet and said, almost to himself, "They never left." I need you to stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you doesn't just change how you see China, it changes how you see civilization itself. Before we go any further, if history like this excites you, hit subscribe. Next week, I'm breaking down DNA evidence that suggests Pacific Islanders reached South America 800 years before anyone thought possible. The findings are surprising, the implications are huge, and they could reshape how we understand ancient exploration. You do not want to miss it. Picture this: 7,000 years ago, northern China. A wide, flat basin cut through by a river so thick with silt it runs yellow, not blue, not green, yellow, like liquid earth. The air smells like turned soil and wood smoke. The sky is enormous out here, and the wind comes from the north carrying cold. There are people living here. Not many. Not yet. But they are building something. Circular houses arranged in planned villages. Pottery painted with delicate geometric designs. Bones and turtle shells scratched with the earliest symbols that will one day become Chinese writing. And in the fields around the village, millet, foxtail millet and broomcorn millet, crops these people domesticated themselves, suited perfectly to the dry, cold plains of northern China. These people have no idea that somewhere far to the west, Sumerians are pressing cuneiform into clay tablets. They have no idea that along another river, the Nile, a civilization is rising that will build monuments lasting thousands of years. They are not learning from anyone. They are not copying anyone. They are building their world from the ground up, with the land under their feet and the generations before them. And then they die. And their children die. And their children's children die. And the river keeps running yellow. And the millet keeps growing. And the village keeps going. For 7,000 years. Here is what DNA actually does when populations separate, and why this matters. Think of it like a clock built into every cell of your body. Every generation, tiny mutations accumulate, random, predictable, measurable. When two populations stop mixing, those mutations diverge in different directions. 1,000 years of separation, and the clocks look slightly different. 10,000 years, they barely resemble each other. Scientists track this through haplogroups, genetic markers passed down through maternal and paternal lines, and through SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms. Tiny one-letter variations in the DNA sequence that work like fingerprints across time. The Food and University team had a simple question. Which ancient civilization shared the most genetic fingerprints with modern Chinese people? They tested everyone. They were systematic, and they were prepared to be surprised. They started with Egypt. The haplogroup data from mummified Egyptian remains was cross-referenced against 11,670 modern Chinese samples. The overlap came back almost zero. Not a faint trail, not a thin thread of connection, almost nothing. The genetic clocks had been running in different directions for so long that whatever shared ancestor Egypt and China had, it lived before civilization existed at all. Egypt was ruled out. Mesopotamia was next: the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the people who built the first cities and wrote the first laws. Different haplogroups, different mutation patterns, a genetic distance that told the same story. These populations had been separate for tens of thousands of years, with almost no meaningful contact. The Indus Valley felt more promising, geographically closer. Cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro were sophisticated, organized, powerful. If there was going to be a connection, this was the candidate. There was some overlap. Haplogroup R1a, common in Indus Valley populations, did show up in modern Chinese samples, at less than 2%. 2%. If there had been real ancestral connection, real migration. Real mixing, you would expect 15, 20, maybe 30%. 2% is what you get from traders passing through once a generation. Strangers who crossed paths and moved on. The Americas, the Maya, the Aztec, ancient Mesoamerica. These populations descended from groups that crossed the Bering Land Bridge 15 to 20,000 years ago, from Siberian ancestors who were themselves part of the Asian migration wave. So there should be some shared DNA with modern Chinese populations, right? There was. But the divergence was massive. Haplogroup Q, dominant in Native American populations, appeared in modern Chinese samples at less than 1%. 15,000 years of independent evolution had made the genetic clocks almost unreadable against each other. Ancient Anatolia, Bronze Age Europe, every test, every civilization, minimal overlap. Genetic distance too great to mean anything more than shared ancient roots from before humanity left Africa. None of them matched. And then they compared modern Chinese DNA to the Yellow River civilization. Haplogroup O3, the most common Y chromosome haplogroup in modern Chinese men, showed up in over 60% of Yellow River remains from 7,000 years ago. Mitochondrial haplogroups M and D passed through the maternal line, matched at similar rates. But the researchers didn't stop there. They went deeper, into individual SNPs, those single-letter variations in the genetic code. They found SNPs linked to lactose intolerance. SNPs tied to hair texture, eye shape, skin pigmentation, all of it matching. 7,000 years apart, and the fine-grained genetic details lined up like two photographs of the same face taken across centuries. This was not a distant trace. This was not a faint echo. This was continuity. Han Dynasty tombs, 2,000 years old, same genetic profile as modern northern Chinese populations. Shang Dynasty remains, 3,200 years old, same haplogroups. 5,000-year-old burial sites from the Yellow River heartland matching. Dynasty after dynasty, war after war. Famine, flood, invasion, the rise and fall of empires, and through all of it, the genetic signature held. The people who built those circular wooden houses 7,000 years ago, who scratched symbols onto bones, who farmed millet in the cold plains of northern China, they are the direct ancestors of 1.4 billion people alive today. The line never broke. Around 5,000 years ago, the Yellow River people started moving. South, they brought their millet, their tools, their language, their DNA, and they pushed into land that was already occupied by someone else entirely. Down in the Yangtze River basin lived a civilization the world has largely forgotten. Rice farmers. They had been cultivating wet rice for at least 8,000 years longer than the Yellow River people had been farming millet. Archaeological sites like Hemudu reveal sophisticated pile dwellings built over water, jade carving traditions, an entire world developed in parallel and in complete isolation from the north. These were not scattered hunter-gatherers. This was a civilization. And then the people from the north arrived. What happened next was not a clean conquest. It was not a massacre. It was something far more human, slow, messy, generational. Intermarriage, the blending of two worlds over centuries. Children who carried both rivers in their blood. The genetic data shows exactly how it happened. Populations in Zhejiang and Fujian, right in the heart of the ancient Yangtze farming zone, carry 25 to 30% ancestry from those original southern rice farmers. Move north toward the Yellow River heartland, and that percentage drops steadily. 15%, then 10, then almost nothing. Even in the far south, Guangdong and Guangxi, Yellow River ancestry dominates at 70 to 75%. The expansion was thorough, but it was never total replacement. The southern world left its mark. It is still there, written in the DNA of people walking through Fujian and Zhejiang today, carrying the genes of rice farmers whose civilization flourished 8,000 years ago. The Yellow River people also pushed west into the Tibetan Plateau. And here the story does something unexpected. Above 4,000 meters, the air is thin. Oxygen levels drop to 60% of what they are at sea level. Most lowland populations cannot function at that altitude. The body simply cannot extract enough oxygen from each breath. The people already living on the plateau had something the newcomers didn't. A variant in a gene called EPAS1, a biological adaptation honed over thousands of years of highland living, that allows the body to process oxygen more efficiently at altitude. It shows up in 80% of modern Tibetans. It is virtually absent in Han Chinese lowland populations. When Yellow River farmers moved into Tibet, they mixed with those highland people. And that mixing gave them the ability to survive. Without the EPAS1 variant from the people they were absorbing, the expansion might have failed entirely. The newcomers needed what the locals already had in their blood. There is something quietly humbling about that. The expanding population, in order to survive, had to become partly the people they were displacing. Now here is the question that has been sitting underneath this entire story, waiting. Why did Chinese population stay so genetically continuous? Europe didn't. Around 5,000 years ago, steppe pastoralists swept into Europe from Central Asia and replaced up to 90% of the male population in some regions. Bronze Age Britain saw its entire genetic profile shift within a few centuries. Modern Europeans are a layered mosaic Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, early Anatolian farmers, and steppe migrants, all stacked on top of each other in different ratios depending on where you are. China experienced invasions too. The Mongols ruled for nearly a century. The Manchu conquered and ruled for over 250 years. These were not minor border skirmishes. These were full military conquests of one of the largest civilizations on Earth. And yet the genetic data shows Mongol ancestry in northern Chinese populations at less than 2%. 2% after 100 years of rule. How? Geography is part of the answer. The Yellow River Basin sits inside a natural fortress. The Himalayas to the southwest, the Gobi and Taklamakan deserts to the northwest, rugged mountain ranges to the south, the Pacific Ocean to the east. The invasions that succeeded came from neighboring regions that had already been genetically mixing with Chinese populations for centuries. No outside group arrived with enough numbers to replace what was already there. Agriculture is another part. Dense farming populations are almost impossible to displace genetically. The Yellow River Basin, during the Bronze Age, could support roughly 100 people per square kilometer. The steppe to the north, 1 or 2 people per square kilometer. When the Mongols conquered China, they were a relatively small military force trying to rule an ocean of people. You can conquer an ocean, you cannot replace it. But there is a third reason, and this one you cannot measure in a lab. Culture. Chinese civilization developed a writing system that held its shape even as spoken dialects fractured into mutual unintelligibility. A person from Shandong and a person from Guangdong could not understand each other's speech, but they could read the same characters, the same classical texts, the same poetry written 1,000 years earlier. The civil service examination system selected government officials based on mastery of Confucian literature. If you wanted power, if you were a Mongol prince or a Manchu aristocrat, you had to become, culturally, Chinese. Your children married into Han families. Your grandchildren read the same text as everyone else. Their distinct genetic identity dissolved into the surrounding population within a few generations. The culture absorbed the conquerors, not the other way around. For over a century, Western anthropologists operated on something called the diffusionist model. The idea that civilization started in a few places, mostly Egypt and Mesopotamia, and spread outward. If you found writing somewhere, someone must have taught it. Complex society was assumed to have a single origin. China never fit. Chinese writing looks nothing like cuneiform or hieroglyphics. Chinese agriculture built on millet and rice, not wheat and barley. Chinese philosophy, Chinese metallurgy, Chinese statecraft, none of it looks borrowed. None of it looks like an adaptation of something developed elsewhere. Historians suspected this for decades. But suspicion is not proof. The DNA is proof. The ancestors of modern Chinese people were not in Egypt. They were not in Mesopotamia. They were on the Yellow River, farming millet in circular wooden houses, scratching symbols onto bones, building something entirely their own, from nothing but the land under their feet and the people beside them. There was never one cradle of civilization. There were many. Human beings, given land and time and necessity, will build something extraordinary, and they will build it on their own terms. Those 11,670 people who gave their DNA, farmers and teachers and factory workers and students from every province in China, most of them probably didn't think much about what they were contributing to. Just a cheek swab. Just a number in a database. But what they carried in their cells was a message written 7,000 years ago by people who had no idea what would come after them. No idea that their descendants would number in the billions. No idea that one day someone would extract that message from blood and bone and read it out loud. The message was simple. We were here. We stayed. We became you. Somewhere along the Yellow River today, in the same basin where those first millet farmers built their circular houses 7,000 years ago, the story is still going. The DNA does not forget. It just carries the story forward.